Thank you everyone for joining us. We are the Society of Professional Journalists International Community. Our aim with our talk series, IC Talks, has always been to connect journalists at a time when it's difficult to do so in person. And now that a year after the pandemic started, we're starting a new series of more condensed conversations with newsrooms and journalists from around the world. And so I'm really excited to have with us today the team behind the Honolulu Civil Beat. We have Nathan Eagle, Asia Payette, Anita Hofschneider, and Kuhu. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, we wanted to have you today because it was on our radar that your newsroom has taken on an initiative to incorporate the locals that you have with translations in the local language. And we really wanted to kind of explore that in the initiative that you have and go deeper into that. So can you tell us more about, first off, the Honolulu Civil Beat and how this initiative came about? And I guess, Nathan, if you want to start, and then whoever wants to take on.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks again for inviting us to have this conversation with you. It means a lot to us. So Civil Beat's public service online only journalism site. We just marked our 10-year anniversary.
Yep.
And so we're a nonprofit. We do a lot of investigative reporting, but also a lot of explanatory journalism. We're covering a lot of different communities. We'll do pretty much everything except sports and arts. So we cover quite a bit, from the environment to infrastructure, climate change, social justice issues, everything. We've added a podcast over the years. What else are we about? What am I missing?
It sounds like you've covered the bases pretty well.
Yeah. So that's us in a nutshell. How did this project come about? Well, I mean, to me, it was like a way overdue kind of thing. It was a long time no-brainer sort of thing. One of the things that always comes to my mind, actually, when I think back on it, is when we were creating the special project landing page, you have to have a little blurb that just explains what it is. And all of us are like, why wouldn't we do this? Like, it's so obvious. So it was actually hard to come up with that verbiage, but we tried our best and came up with something. So we had set out to translate, I think it was going to be one story a month initially, up that before we even launched to once a week, thanks to early signs of support for paying the translators and just workflow that makes it possible. Yeah, that's how it kind of kicked off.
Yeah.
And was there a particular moment that, a particular story or beat or moment that triggered this initiative? Can you talk more about that?
Well, the history of the Hawaiian language in our state has always kind of been a colorful one. It is a state recognized official language. So you can, write a check in Hawaiian and any business organization would need to accept it and cash it. But the interesting thing about Hawaiian language is it's also nearly nobody's first language these days. But there's a huge, would you still consider it a Renaissance kind of movement, Kuhu, like a cultural push to kind of renormalize the Hawaiian language just in society, And so this was a way that Civil Beat could be a part of that kind of community movement.
And one thing I would note is just that, so I'm not Hawaiian, but I am indigenous to another Pacific island in the Marianas. And as a fellow indigenous Pacific person, I just have so much admiration and amazement at the incredible, all the different ways in which the Hawaiian language historically has been documented in a written form. Prior to the overthrow, so many different newspapers written in the Hawaiian language. That's just an incredible resource for any indigenous community, especially in the Pacific, where so many languages didn't have that level of documentation. And so this is just such a small step to kind of bring a little bit of that back and to honor that history and this community and this land in which we are so privileged to be able to do our journalism.
Yeah. Civil Beat's often, we're looking to fill niches here and there, if the main daily paper is covering this issue well, or TV is doing this well, we're going to deploy our resources where there's gaps in coverage with kind of an altruistic view of that. And when we were kind of researching this project, we were hard pressed to find any publication. Like occasionally one story here or one story there. I couldn't find any newspaper that was just, you know, readily available in Hawaiian. That's after there were dozens and dozens and dozens, like just 100 years ago, till they were kind of systematically wiped out. So this, like Anita says, I think it's really important. This is, to me, it's a small step, but it's something. It's a commitment to one day a week perpetuate a language, as well as hopefully help us identify underreported stories, connect with our Indigenous readers better, and just see where it goes from there.
Yeah. I think I want to go back a little bit to what you said, and also what Anita said. Like, I mean, the Native Hawaiian language papers, I use them all the time when I'm a journalist. So it's just so, I mean, when I read my story, right, in Olelo, it was so gratifying for me to see that, like, you know, we're perpetuating this tradition, that we're not just an oral, you know, we don't only use oral traditions, but we also, as a culture, we write, we express ourselves, you know. So I think when we started this project, it's really about like respecting the culture and honoring it, and also giving space for people to bring it back into our culture and make it, you know, something that's more normal and people can do. But I remember when we first started talking about translating into Olelo, I'm actually the host for our offshore podcast, and I did a whole season about Native Hawaiians in the past and present. And me and Anita talked about like how cool would it be to like hear it in the native language, these stories. And I think it's really it's a gratifying and really representative experience for Native Hawaiians to see themselves, to see their language be important in like the general society and media.
Yeah. When you mentioned the newspapers, actually, it reminded me that a reader, we got really cool responses like right away, right after they kick off. One reader said like, oh, this is going to be so cool. I'm trying to learn Olelo at home by reading these newspapers from the 1800s. So it's awesome to have a current source of regularly translated news content. Because I was thinking, like, when I read, you know, news stories that are in the 1800s, it's hard to understand them in English. So I'm imagining it's similarly difficult. So he was really stoked on that effort.
Oh, wonderful. Well, so what has been the response from the locals that are seeing your content? Have you been getting the responses and getting feedback?
Yeah, actually, we've been getting some really fantastic feedback for this project. We've seen, you know, an uptick in reader donations because of it. A lot of people are just really excited to see that we've chosen to make this investment in our local community. One of our, I guess, biggest threads is that we really want to get this into the hands of our young community. You know, through various education channels. This is a great opportunity for our young readers who are kind of living in that intersection of English and Native Hawaiian, and exactly what Nathan was just saying, you know, this is a great opportunity for them to learn about the social impacts that are occurring around them, while also kind of brushing up on practicing their native language at the same time.
Yeah, the response has been really cool. We had, you know, everything from small funders start kicking in more donations. We'd just love to see this too. We have enough now to even pay for the translators entirely, which is really just cool. It's gratifying to know that there's that kind of support behind it, which I don't know, it makes you want to keep doing it.
For sure. And so when you were putting this initiative together, what was the thought process of how to accomplish this? I mean, if another newsroom wants to decide to take this task on, what tips would you have for them?
I think one thing we talked about was, despite our overwhelming enthusiasm for this, trying to modulate our expectations and be realistic with where we're getting started. So I would encourage other newsrooms who are considering doing this, first of all, definitely do it. I think regardless of how big or small your native populations are, their languages are just as important, and they deserve news in their languages. So also feel free to reach out to us and ask us if we need help.
Yeah,
but that said, I would recommend starting small and building up. Like Ku'u mentioned, we were just thinking, oh my gosh, how beautiful would it be to have an entire podcast in Olelo? But we need to start first with, you know, 1 article a week. We even considered starting with just 1 article a month. Just start with whatever is realistic and build up. And like with more community support, it will enable us to grow this project and perpetuate it and make it a critical and permanent part of Civil Beat's news operation. But, you know, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to, you know, overwhelm ourselves and then not be able to do other aspects of our work. So I would just kind of think backwards, you know, you have your dream of what you would like to be able to provide, and then figure out like, well, what can you do now? And over time, hopefully it'll grow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a huge component for us too was assessing what our resources are. Because, you know, we're a fairly small newsroom and very few of us are familiar with the Hawaiian language, much less able to, you know, produce an entire story written in Olelo, Hawaii. So it was really important for us to assess what our community was and what we could tap into as far as, you know, translator resources and funding and things like that, just so that we could, you know, create this product and just make it as successful as it has been thus far.
I would also say that, you know, Asia and Ku'u's like linguistic and cultural knowledge has been so integral with this project. I don't know if we would be doing it without them, or if we were, it would be like not as well. So I just want to give a shout out to them.
Yeah, integral, I would say invaluable.
Yeah.
I really would. I think Anita's exactly right on working backwards too. Like, so we were like, okay, well, what does this look like? A workflow. Establishing a workflow was really important. So, okay, the story comes in on a Tuesday. We got to get it put into our system on a Wednesday to publish Thursday. Asia's going to be back reading it. I'm going to be inputting and make sure I'm not dropping any photos or forgetting like a translation and a cut line here or there. I think that was really important. Setting up something that we knew we could commit to once a month, and then okay, once a week we can do once a week. We can do this. We got this. No problem.
That workflow is also very important for making sure that the English language and the Hawaiian language stories go out on the same day. So prior to this, Civil Beat hadn't done any translations, I don't believe, into Hawaiian, but we had done into a couple other Pacific and Asian languages. And what we found was, you know, if we waited a few days after publishing the English language article to publish a translated article, it just didn't get the same readership or attention. And by then also the news was a little bit older. And so kind of just really focusing on that workflow to make sure that they could, you know, come out at the same time. It seems like a small thing, but it's actually been very important for this.
Yeah, I think Anita touched on this too, but like realistic expectations too. Like this is a project that's not good. Its success isn't going to be measured in clicks. You know, we're not going to get thousands and thousands, but fortunately, so we don't measure, like it's one metric, but it's not like an overarching, like, oh my God, it has to do this. So we're like, well, how do we measure the impact? And like Asia mentioned, like, well, we already have teachers reaching out who want to incorporate it in classrooms and folks in the community that's helping them learn the language. And so that's the kind of impact we're tracking, and that it will make the project, I think, worthwhile.
That's wonderful. And so what's the future of this project? What are the next steps? What are you going to, have you put a plan forward as what you'd like to see? What is it, 6 months from now or a year from now?
Well, we definitely have huge dreams for this project. But yeah, we do have some actionables mapped out. One of our next steps is to consider what it would take to publish in Hawaiian first, and then translate that content into English for our English readers. And beyond that, you know, I think we really want to look into other multimedia options. Like Ku'u was mentioning, you know, how great would it be if her podcast content was presented in Olelo, Hawaii? Things like that. And more importantly, as Anita mentioned, all of these like Pacific Islander languages were not written first, right? So how cool would it be if they were presented in the same context that they were like normally used in olden times, right? So that would be, you know, podcasts. Maybe we could convince Chad to do a spot in Hawaiian. Wouldn't that be okay? Videos, that kind of thing.
Yeah. We're also looking to identify columnists and just add more writers, more voices as well.
So for each of you, what did this project mean for you? And how has your involvement, your perspective of it from the beginning changed until now? Or has it not changed?
I mean, I really can't describe like how much it means to me. I think that, you know, seeing it's I see, I have no words. It's just totally gratifying and affirming, and just to see like your own language means something to other people, and just the fact that this project means so much to other people just shows that like I'm not the only one that feels it, you know, and just feeling better represented, even just as like a Native Hawaiian, and like knowing that other Native Hawaiians like want to connect to their culture, want to know their language. It's really full circle to be able to offer that for people, but also see that like in myself.
I know that the day it first was published, Ku'u and I both cried. It was one of those things that, you know, you're working on it, and then the emotional impact of it doesn't really hit you until you see it. And for me, I think its meaning extends really beyond Hawaii. I mean, it's so meaningful here. It's so overdue, as Nathan said, but it also, I'm so excited to be speaking with you today, because I think it just shows like how important internationally it is for these Indigenous language to be recognized and honored and perpetuated, and the really important role that the news media can take in terms of doing that. And, you know, all four of us are working on this because we're so enthusiastic, but it's really doesn't need to be a 4-person team. Like, you know, it's very doable is what I'm trying to say. And it's just incredibly meaningful. Similar to Ku'u, it's hard to describe just how meaningful it is.
How do you follow that? For K through 12, I attended Kamehameha Schools, which is a school for students of Hawaiian ancestry. And so it's kind of like, you know, Nathan said it's a no-brainer to do this project. It never occurred to me until, you know, years out of Kamehameha that seeing the Hawaiian language everywhere was not yet normal. And so when the opportunity arose to make it normal, I said, why would I not want to be a part of this? It's just a really cool thing to see these things that I took for granted all those years kind of have new life breathed into them through this project.
Yeah. What they said.
Ditto.
Yeah. No, it's incredibly fulfilling. I think our two translators, Kea and Ha'a, are just absolutely invaluable as well. I'd be remiss to not like highlight their efforts, because as Anita mentioned, like this kind of project really is doable. You know, you get questions from your other fellow editors and bosses like, well, how much time is this going to take? Like, you know, we're able to, once you get it off the ground, commit to a workflow that it really doesn't take that much time off. And it's like, wow, what a cool thing we can accomplish without an incredible amount of time and effort. The translators, however, they're the ones working late. I think I got our next story came in around midnight last night. So all the credit to them. But it's possible. And to me, that's what's been so fulfilling, is like, we have an idea, let's execute it. No one else is doing it. And here we go. And we're off. It just means the world to me.
Wonderful. And so one thing we always do with our talks towards the end of our conversations, we want to ask our guests, what does press freedom mean to them? So can we have each of you let us know, what does press freedom mean to you?
Shall we start on the left?
Yes, we should.
Shouldn't have reversed it last time. To me, like, having worked at other papers where, both as a reporter and an editor, where my energy was being spent predominantly fighting the advertising department, this tit for tat thing, like, you know, do a story and like we'll sell an ad and things like that. Like, we don't have that here, and that's a kind of freedom that I longed for. So that's one thing. Not being beholden to any advertisers or things like that is a really, really important thing. But then that aside, you also have to have the freedom, of course, to pursue the stories that you want to do and do them in a way that you find meaningful and impactful. And I can say I check that box there too, for the most part as well, which is really great. What else? Being transparent. To me, freedom and transparency go hand in hand. Can't really have one without the other. This is the top. I mean, resources are nice to be able to really flex that freedom, because sometimes stories take you places, or they require thousands of dollars worth of public documents that you're being charged for. So that helps too.
I mean, I might have to just ditto Nathan on this one. For me, the hugest thing is, the ability of the fantastic team here. I'm on the operational side, so this is me, sticking my toes in the pool of the reporting life with this project. But I just truly value that the reporting team here has such an emphasis on unbiased reporting. I have a science background, and so the ability for people to share these really important impactful stories without allowing like a third party's opinion or even their own opinions to impact the writing is really important to me.
The water turn as cool as would make them look.
Yeah, I like Nathan, I have multiple definitions of press freedom in my mind. The first that comes to mind is, being able to write stories about people in power without fear of them being censored. And that is something that Civil Beat empowers its reporters to do. But another way I think about press freedom is being able to write not just from different angles, and even from not just the typical angles, but also thinking about stories through an Indigenous perspective, thinking about them in terms of, writing for marginalized communities instead of just writing about them. I think that a big part of press freedom is being able to just conceptualize stories differently and tell different stories that might not be able to be told otherwise.
Yeah, I'm gonna ditto Anita on that one. I mean, this is the first time I've worked in a newsroom, so I think of press freedom in a lot of the same ways that Nathan does, but mostly in the way that Anita described, being able to, do stories that aren't just about and extractive of the community, but really for them and empower them. I think you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Well, our time has gone by so quickly, and I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with you. Before we close out our convo, is there anything that you guys want to add that we may not have discussed that you think is important for our audience to know?
I just want to reiterate, if this is something you might want to do in your newsroom, even if you're just, a lowly reporter without any managerial power, call us, email us, reach out to us, and we're happy to support you in whatever way you can, even if it's just figuring out how to present it to management. And also, I would say, if it doesn't work the first time, try again. Yeah, this is such a worthy goal. I'm so glad that we all pushed for it and were able to do it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that. And that kind of triggered another question for me. What could the international community or newsrooms outside of Honolulu help you guys in the mission that you have? Is there anything that we can provide you?
I mean, that's a loaded question. Hawaii is such a diverse place. And that, establishing relationships with other newspapers that are producing similar content would probably make a huge impact for our community here. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, I think so. I think spreading and sharing each other's work helps you feel not so isolated, that I feel like I'm the only one trying to get this kind of project off the ground when, nope, sure enough, just South Pacific there. So
if we can get content into Hawaii readers' hands that are about their home spaces in their native languages, I'm sure they'd be thrilled to do that. And if we can connect with those other orgs and have their help getting our word out, maybe that'll reach some of Ku'u's diaspora viewers and give them, greater access to that content also.
Civil Beat sometimes does partnerships with newspapers. For example, I wrote a story this past year that was published in the Samoa News. And so if you are a newspaper with a very with the Native Hawaiian community in your community, even if you're in another country or another state, feel free to reach out to us and maybe we could co-publish some of our work. And I don't know, we're just open to different options.
We're open to anything.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing more of your work and supporting you along the way. Hopefully we can have you back maybe 6 months or a year from now to hear the progress and how everything is going with you guys.
Awesome.
Yeah,
welcome that.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.